Hello, welcome. I'm No02, and thank you for watching this video. This is, I think we'll call it like the ultimate Back for Blood review. The game recently just announced that they're going to be ending their live service. Servers will still be up and maintained for some time, for some unknowable future, so you can still play the game, but no more content, no more significant updates on the horizon. And at this point in time, uh, I personally have 1,000+ hours in Back for Blood. I have 300+ videos, guides, uh, deck videos, blah blah blah. Whatever you can think, I have pretty much the ultimate amount of content on YouTube. I don't think anyone else has as much content on Back for Blood. At least not as comprehensive of a deep dive into how to play the game and all the nuances and ins and outs and things like that. But I think to a degree, I'm in a unique position to basically talk about the story of Back for Blood, uh, basically from its release until where it is now. So check the timestamps for this video. I'll be breaking the game down, sort of where it started, where it is now, the journey that it went along, how the game felt and played, and what it got right, what it got wrong. Sort of general take of like Back for Blood, what it's done for the genre, what it says about Turtle Rock, maybe things like that. And I think really before we get into like the actual release of Back for Blood, I do think we need to talk about the Left 4 Dead comparison. I love Left 4 Dead. Between Left 4 Dead and Left 4 Dead 2, I have easily probably around 5,000 hours. I played that game every single day, 8 hours a day. When it came out, I was a teenager, so spare time was easy to come by. But Back for Blood and Turtle Rock, they made the sort of the announcement that they have the dev team from Left 4 Dead is working on Back for Blood, the spiritual successor to Left 4 Dead. They sort of just set themselves up for that comparison. That was part of their advertising, part of their propaganda plan, right, for selling and advertising the game and things like that. And I think it is important to note that they did set themselves up in a sense where Back for Blood needed to be just as good or better than Left 4 Dead. Otherwise, that Left 4 Dead comparison was going to be thrown in their face. And thrown in their face it was. It was. I think, in a general sense, the Back 4 Blood experience was, at the very least, fit into the genre, fit into the Left 4 Dead genre. Spiritual successor, yes. But on release, Back 4 Blood just had a bunch of issues. Major issues. And they can pretty easily be summarized into bugged quickplay, speedrunning, and grenade duping. And those three things sort of combined in the early days of Back 4 Blood culminated in sort of all of it turned into this just poor player experience, I think, for a lot of people at the beginning of the game. But the biggest issue of it being the quickplay being bugged. And I think even, we'll talk about this more, but even to this day, the quickplay is still bugged. This style of game, this cooperative PvE shooter game with a heavy emphasis on RNG, to sort of the game is designed to be replayed over and over again, but the RNG and the other elements of it make it so that every time you play through the same campaign, it's a little bit different, a little bit nuanced, not always quite the same. Big part of it, though, is actually playing with different people. Strangers, different friends, playing with different characters, using different guns, using different decks. There's a whole lot of opportunity here to experience the game multiple times in slightly different ways. The big part of that is just being able to log on and hit the quick play button and get thrown in with some random people, random missions, or a random campaign, and you sort of just figure it out along the way. You improv your solutions to sort of all of the problems. And for me, that was a really big appeal to this game. I loved playing with random people in Left 4 Dead. But I wanted to do the same thing in Back 4 Blood. And I think for a lot of people, essentially, if you just wanted to log on and do a couple missions and help people finish their campaign, quick play, I think, would be the standard means of playing, the standard way in which people would engage with the game. And if you use the quick play functionality, it was bugged to hell. Just huge issues with quick play. to the extent of and it was so nuanced in that, like, if you joined in Quickplay and took control of your bot, but then you died and then went into the next mission, you would still have the bot cards. But if you didn't die, that wouldn't happen. And there was all these different little nuanced differences between the bot you took control of and what mission you were on, and did you live, did you die, how many people are bots on your team. There was all of these issues of like not having money, not having ammo, having your guns reset to the default bot weapons, having bot cards linger with you, having your deck not work. There was tons of problems with quick play that were gameplay impeding, to the point that like large elements of the game just didn't function for you because you joined a campaign in the middle of it, because you used the quick play functionality. And I think it's just like, it was the what I think should have been sold as the core player experience. And if it was, like, if quick play was pushed more often than hitting a campaign button, then a lot of people's player experiences suffered, because on release and for months afterwards, the quick play just didn't work right. Literally, you would suffer as a player for trying to join in a match quick play. And now there was sort of a workaround, pretty quickly, I think, at least for me and maybe some others, that if you used the campaign functionality where you started the campaign from the start, yourself and people who joined your campaign right at the beginning, you would have none of those problems. Almost none of them. Though, of course, if somebody left and you had somebody quick play into the middle of your campaign, they would have all of those issues, and pretty commonly they'd be like, I gotta leave, like, I have no ammo, no money, like, my guns have disappeared. There were some bugs where, like, if you were taking control of a bot and then somebody else also joined, it would kick you out of the bot and you were forced to just spectator mode for the rest of, like, just what seemed like and felt like endless bugs that directly impacted the player experience and the player's ability to play the game if you use the quick play functionality. And even though you can play the campaign and not have that issue by just starting a new campaign yourself, one way or another you would experience it, whether somebody on your team was experiencing it or if quick play you would experience it. It was just a big problem. And slowly over time it did get fixed. But before it got fixed, and even though it sort of like didn't all get fixed at once, there was changes and updates and things didn't quite take effect. And we'll get into updates a little bit here, but along with the quick play being bugged, there was then speedrunning and grenade duping. And I love speedrunning. If you don't know, there's a whole speedrunning community. It's called Games Done Quick, where they speedrun games for charity, and there's a whole website dedicated to people being the fastest players in the world for particular video games. They have leaderboards. So, like, I want to separate this idea that, like, there's a speedrunning world and community for all of the games that you might play and imagine, and it's, like, wonderful and it's beautiful and I love watching it. In a game like this, though, we might say there's a philosophical argument to be had about, letting players play the game that they enjoy. But in a general sense, Back 4 Blood, Left 4 Dead, every video game sells you on a fantasy. And for this style of game, the fantasy is that you and 3 other people have to survive a zombie apocalypse, and through teamwork, you will seize the day, right? You'll see the sunrise because you and your teammates work together. That's sort of like the general fantasy of it. It's like a cooperative game inherently. It's designed for players to have to work together. But with the sort of frustration of playing through the game, or sort of the nature of nightmare mode, which we'll talk about in a little bit, there became a trend where you can run all of the cards that made you sprint faster in the early days. And again, this ended up affecting player experience, because you, the casual player, would load into a match, and 1 or 2 of your teammates, or maybe 3 of them, and you're the odd man out, they would open up the safe room door and just sprint away. And whether they died or were successful in getting all the way to the end of the mission, you have to recognize that impacts the player experience. It does not fulfill the fantasy. The person who speedruns and gets to the end of the mission, the way the game works, pretty much deactivates the entire mission. Nothing will spawn anymore, or limited spawns. They've gotten through all the doors. The game typically only likes to spawn things around the player who's furthest in the mission. So whether that person was successful or not in speedrunning, it didn't adhere to the fantasy of cooperative gameplay that players are sort of expecting. And if they died, it was annoying because now you're just playing through the mission with 3 people instead of 4 because one of your players was just selfishly trying to do something and it looks dumb. Or they were successful and the mission is empty. The mission becomes totally empty of enemies. There's nothing to do. You just walk through, you loot what you can, get to the end, you shoot the zombies that are at the safe room door, you open it up. It's like overall, it ended up ruining the player experience. And Turtle Rock's response to it was basically to keep nerfing the cards that let you sprint fast. And ironically, that ended up sort of killing or hurting the actual speedrunning community, because if you were going to officially speedrun Back for Blood and put your time on the leaderboards, you did so in offline mode. You didn't speedrun with 3 random people. That's just not, maybe it's unethical in the sense that it didn't support the overall fantasy of the game. But that's just typically how you speedrun, is that typically speedrun by yourself unless you're very specifically doing a cooperative category. In which case then everyone involved is speedrunning along with you. But that just wasn't the case in online mode with random people. So again, between now the quick play being bugged and the speedrunners, you can now see the pattern of how the casual player experience on release was being adversely affected. And then you go into grenade duping, where there's a glitch found where you can have infinite grenades, slap on a card called Fire in the Hole, which gives you health every time you throw a grenade. And you had infinite grenades and you had infinite health. And even to this day, if you have grenades, if you have something to throw, you cannot lose. And so this grenade duping, again, ended up adversely affecting the player experience because one player on your team would be grenade duping, and the mission would be free. You couldn't lose. That person would just be running a forward, throwing grenades, infinitely blowing everything up. Nothing can ever hurt you. Nothing can ever kill you. That person had infinite health and infinite damage. And it was just again, there was nothing to do. And so now we got quick play, which was preventing you from playing the game correctly. Speedrunners, who again ruin that player experience and don't really let you play the game correctly. Because if they're successful, the mission turns off basically. So now you don't get to play because somebody else got to play the mission for you basically. And thirdly, if you had a grenade duper, the same thing happened where basically they get to play the game, but you don't because there's nothing to do because they just blow everything up. In between those 3 things, for the first 6 months of the game, and maybe even longer, I can't quite recall, the casual, the standard player experience was, I would say, pretty much ruined. There's videos of me playing online with grenade dupers, videos of Swing Point playing online and just trying to mess with these grenade dupers. I don't know, what do you do? You can report them technically, but it's it's a cooperative PvE game. This is not a competitive multiplayer game. So reporting these people, I don't think they should be punished. It's just, glitches happen, bugs happen, right? So it's not necessarily Turtle Rock's fault to a degree that these bugs were there. Though again, they did choose to release the game in the current state that they did. But overall, just that casual player experience was really hurt between the quick play being bugged, grenade duping, and the speedrunning mentality, because people were just desperate to get their SWAT skins as soon as possible and show them off. And I got all of my SWAT skins, and then people are well, you probably speedran it, so it doesn't count. And this whole culture just sort of evolved around basically just either quick play didn't work or you were a dirty speedrunner or a dirty grenade duper, right? And just that overall experience was really, really hurt. Next is Swarm mode. This is a big one. Versus mode, so much fun in Left 4 Dead. Though, we need to remember that for Left 4 Dead, when it came to the Versus mode, big problems. In Left 4 Dead, there was no matchmaking. Games were incredibly lopsided. There was no punishment for people leaving. So I don't know about you guys, but my experience with Left 4 Dead Versus mode is that 90% of the time, you would not finish a Versus campaign with the same people that you started it with, because people would get upset, people would get frustrated, people are screaming and cursing at each other because things aren't going well. It's usually incredibly lopsided, where one team is just absolutely dominating each other. I think very easily I can say of 100 games that I played in Versus mode, maybe 1 or 2 of them would be actually close battles, competitive. Like let's get real here. Like the versus mode, as Left 4 Dead presented it, was incredibly janked up. Not that it didn't function right, just that the human nature of it all just didn't work well. It just didn't function well. A lot of the player experience in versus mode was pretty tainted just because people would get upset with each other or be so lopsided in general. And I think to a degree, when people were complaining about Swarm mode in Back 4 Blood, people were remembering versus mode with like rose-colored glasses, because versus mode in Left 4 Dead devolved into just toxicity and unfair play, and you could have a team of 4 random people versus a team of 4 coordinated people, and that just doesn't work. It's never worked ever in any competitive multiplayer game since the dawn of time. It never will. And Left 4 Dead had literally 0 systems to manage any of that. So I want to just clarify that, because we should be able to appreciate at the very least what Back 4 Blood tried to do with the Swarm mode. As far as I know, there was no real matchmaking, but there was a punishment for leaving, which was pretty insignificant, but at least they tried. And when it came to versus mode, again, like, you're playing through an entire campaign, you're playing through each level twice, and you're playing against real people, so sometimes these missions would take longer than it normally would versus just the AI. And so completing a versus mode campaign in Left 4 Dead could be easily an hour plus worth of time. And again, like, it just all added to this element of just people leaving and things changing and things not working out. So I appreciate in Swarm mode that for the most part, outside of like loading times, you know, a Swarm mission or Swarm mode, a mission would last somewhere between 20 to 30 minutes at the most, because it's about how long you can survive, and then beating somebody's time. And so, you know, and for the most part, getting past 5 minutes was incredibly hard if it was a competitive match. So I just appreciate that they did try to sort of change it up with the Swarm mode, that they did try to address some of the issues that existed originally in the versus mode. And I do know that, like, eventually for Left 4 Dead, like, some people put on a versus mode, like, league, where you can, you know, get ranked and be more competitive, and, like, there would be more serious consequences for leaving. That's cool and all, but, like, appreciate that, like, that's not how the game released. Like, that's not something that Valve did, right? That's what the player community did. So in theory, we could have done the same thing for Swarm mode, maybe, but I don't think Back 4 Blood has the same modding tools that allow it to do something like that. But let's just appreciate that they did try to solve some of those problems with the Swarm mode. But was the Swarm mode fun? Not really. I think the biggest telltale sign that Swarm mode was not going to be quite as good as it needed to be was when they had limited card selection, and cards were different in Swarm mode. So, like, it added an extra layer of complexity to the game to a degree, that, but, like, also too, like, it took away that sense of familiarity. Like, I can't play through the campaign, learn all the cards, unlock all the cards, and then go into Swarm mode and be like, all right, I'm prepared, I'm ready, but it's like half the cards are not there. Almost all of the cards are different in some way or another. And so, like, that to me right there just spoke to, like, oh, like, the balance for Swarm mode is going to be an issue. And then when it came to balancing the mutations, and, like, I think to this day, you can still do the Tallboy skippity hop. Like, there's a bug that you can do with the Tallboy charge in Swarm mode, where you can like jump towards the end of the Tallboy charge and just like double the distance of the charge that it can do. And so I didn't play a tremendous amount of Swarm mode to get too deep into like the balance of it all, but ultimately it all swims down to just, like, again, there was no matchmaking, pre-made teams versus randoms. People were complaining that they wanted Swarm mode to have a versus mode like the campaign, and you can just do, like, the 5 missions, like, from mission 1 to the first finale, because each campaign had multiple finales. I think overall it just would not have worked unless they had implemented other things that solved the original problems. But Swarm mode just didn't end up being that fun, that sort of interesting. I don't know. I just like needed more. It was like rigid and like, oh, there's things to unlock with a toolkit, but you can only have one person with a toolkit, and it was still random. Where like one team would be the cleaners, and they would get random loot and random guns, and then it would flip flop. Right, you would switch sides, and then the new team of cleaners, they would have completely different gear and loot and ammo, and that right there was like inherently unfair because like they got a bunch of grenades and they got two AA-12s and like the highest DPS gun in the game without the need of any cards. They got two AA-12s and an LMG. Like we didn't get any of those things, right? Like there's just like it just it just didn't feel good. It just didn't work out. And I think people got hung up on this idea of like complaining about wanting a normal versus mode. I just don't think it would have worked. Um, I do think in general, like this style of game, the concept of like playing through a normal campaign, but like the special enemies are played by enemy players, very cool idea. Very cool idea. And I would love to see that implemented in a way where like there was maybe some measure of MMR and like you couldn't matchmake into a pre-made team with your randoms and things like that, just to help control that player experience. But a swarm mode, I think I like the concept of it. I appreciate what they tried to do with it. It just didn't work out. And frankly, of my 1,000+ hours in Back for Blood, maybe 20 of them are spent in swarm mode. So I don't feel the most like confident in talking about like the balance of it all. But at the end of the day, it just didn't work out. People didn't like it. The population for swarm mode died off very quickly. And it just didn't work out, but I think we appreciate what they tried to do. Ultimately, I think Back for Blood sort of set up a nice foundation for what could be a really good game. It did sort of deliver on this in the general sense that Left 4 Dead experience, but it just was like bogged down by these bugs and issues and the swarm mode not being very good, and just sort of like it ended up being janky. So then they started updating the game, right? And we'll sort of go on a little journey here of where it is now. And even then, Turtle Rock had some issues. My biggest gripe, I had to say, was that the updates that they did weren't always true. Every single update from the beginning till now, they would have some issues. One, their update notes would not be consistent across all platforms. You can go read the update notes on Steam and then read the updates posted on their website, and they would be different. They would not be the same. And this actually led to some issues as far as like some update notes would have, this got changed. This is no longer a thing. Then you'd go play the game, and it did not get changed at all. It was just not true. But then there would be things that were changed in the game, but were not mentioned at all in the patch notes. And this was consistent. Every single update that they did was inconsistent, was not properly like communicated through the patch notes. And that to me is just like a huge loss, I think, for me. Especially somebody who's a content creator who was like, let's go through the patch notes, let's read the patch notes, let's talk about what's changing, what this means for the game. And a small portion of what you talked about just wasn't true. Or you just didn't have all of the information. Cards would get changed and there'd be nothing nothing in the notes that talked about them. And for me, personally, when it comes to a game studio that's presenting itself to its community, to a game studio that has received a backlash for releasing a game that has some issues and some fundamental problems, updates is your opportunity to basically ask for forgiveness. Like, updates are your game studio's opportunity to rebuild trust with your player community. And that opportunity was squandered. Every single update, right? Updates are your opportunity to restore faith to your player base and to the players who might be looking on the outside. Do they come back? Do they buy in at all? And when your updates are irregular, inconsistent, mismanaged, not accurate, you undermine that opportunity that you had with the update itself. And it happened every single update from start till the last one. Every single one. Very frustrating, very annoying, and just, again, didn't help Back for Blood's overall image, because basically myself and Swingpoint and other content creators had to, like, make follow-up videos or read in the comments, like, hey, like, these things got changed, but they're not here. It was just very, very, very annoying. And so where is Back for Blood now? I will say overall, despite the inconsistency of the updates, the game did improve. Quickplay at this point is still bugged, or at least it feels bugged. Quickplay is overall better, absolutely overall better, but there are so many issues with it and so many little nuanced bugs with it. Like, I literally can't remember what is a bug still and what's not when it comes to the Quickplay mode. But to the still to this point though, you'll still occasionally spawn in or like go into the next mission that you've joined a campaign from Quickplay, and you'll have no copper, you'll have no ammo, you'll have literally nothing, which is still a bug, I think, or at least shouldn't be that way, because like you don't want to punish your player who just tried to join in a random campaign and help other people out. Like, you're punishing that player if that's not a bug. Like, if that's like as intended, that's huge game design flaw. But still to this day, I think Quickplay is marginally bugged to some extent, or at least doesn't feel quite good. But overall, Back for Blood, I think the campaign is actually a far better experience. In fact, the first update, Tunnels of Terror, which introduced hives, which is an alternative exit in a mission that takes you like on a little detour. That's like risk reward. You go into an extra mission. It does not count towards the progress of the campaign. You have to go through, potentially more danger, more hazardous missions potentially. But you do get the opportunity for extra loot, legendary guns, legendary attachments, extra things like that. Hives are actually a really cool addition to the game. In fact, I think Back for Blood needed to release with the content that was in Tunnels of Terror. Because it was at that point the sort of like rogue-like element of Back for Blood really came to life. With the deck system, the ability to purchase extra cards over the course of a campaign, there was just like scratching, like right on the top of like being able to like experience a rogue-like experience with Back for Blood. When it comes to these Left 4 Dead style games, it's all about the RNG. It's all about the replayability of these games, because ultimately, like, Left 4 Dead's like, if you were to play Left 4 Dead on easy and like just like basically W key from one safe room to the next one, each Left 4 Dead campaign like is maybe like 30 minutes long. You can like if we were to like really break it down into that sort of concept, even for like Back for Blood, the game is maybe literally like 5 hours worth of gameplay content. Like, that's it. Like it's the same for the Left 4 Dead. The game is literally designed around and hinged around this idea that there's a lot of RNG, there's a lot of elements that keep the player coming back, so that each time you play through a campaign, it's a little bit different. It's not quite the same. And Back 4 Blood actually has more of that than Left 4 Dead does, because there's the card system. You can play through a campaign basically playing as a different archetype of person, or you can purchase extra cards throughout the campaign, which makes your character different and stronger. You can find different guns, different rarities, things like that. In addition to that, when they introduced the Hive for the expansion 1, it was just more of that same idea, more of that roguelike element, more legendary weapons, legendary attachments, more opportunities for the character powering up. The corrupted chest would have extra cards that the player could pick up, extra basic cards. It really did end up like sort of solidifying the foundation of this rogue-like element to the game, where every time you play through a campaign, it could be significantly different from your character, your cards, what you find, plus all the different corruption cards that you're encountering over the course of the campaign. I think where Back 4 Blood is now as like a cooperative PvE experience is actually quite good. It's actually quite good. And honestly, I like want more of it. Like, I feel like they still just are scratching the surface to a degree of like what like a rogue-like style cooperative PvE shooter game could be like. And I actually think that this is the greatest contribution that Back 4 Blood has made, I think, to this genre. Is that to an extent, I think they really sort of showed off what this style of game could really be like. if you embrace the sort of the roguelike mentality even harder, like did it even more. And then the next two campaigns, I think. So overall, like Back 4 Blood now as like a general game, pretty decent. Especially if you end up playing with 3 friends and like play through the campaign on the hardest difficulty or work your way up to it and sort of like get that RNG experience. But I would love to see actually like more opportunity for buying cards, for you to have the ability to buy the same card again. Like there's this whole element of like you can play through a campaign of Back 4 Blood and like you have these moments, like these memories of like, oh man, like this campaign we all bought. There was hazard pay on the very first mission of Act 1. We all bought it. By the end of the campaign, we were all super rich. We had so much money. It was so cool. Because when it comes to these PvE experiences, like Slay the Spire, one really cool thing about the game is that on occasion, you, the player, become invincible because of the things and random events that have happened that led to you basically having an infinitely cycling deck and infinite energy and things like that. And so I feel like in a sense Left 4 Dead needed to embrace that more, but they have like the foundation of that sort of concept where there are some niche scenarios where you and your team can become unbelievably powerful at the end of the campaign, and it's quite fun. And it's like it's not an issue because it's a PvE game, it's not a multiplayer game. Who cares if the players are super uber powerful by the end of a campaign? They're shooting AI zombies, right? And I think sort of like Back 4 Blood just touches barely on that concept. When it came to the next couple of expansions, 2 and 3, which we just finished the third expansion here, we got this interesting like this hint of story. This, like there's something going on here. There's like a cult of people who are embracing this worm that's causing people to turn into zombies, and like the story of them trying to like they're doing stuff, and at the end of the day there's no real substance to the story, but it just gave me this idea of like, wouldn't it be kind of nice like if this campaign had a legitimate story start to finish where there's intrigue, and every time you play through the campaign you learn a little bit more, but also too maybe if you can somehow like systematically have replaying through the campaign multiple times give you a clearer picture of what's going on. Have it systematically, like you can't experience the same line of dialogue so many times. You have to experience the other other lines of dialogue. I don't know, but I think in a general sense, between touching on the roguelike elements and touching on this sort of like semi-interesting idea of a story, I'm gonna kind of realize like, oh man, like after 3 expansions, I think Back 4 Blood is still in this sort of state of like it's a great foundation or concept of what this genre could potentially give us, of what it could really be like having a game that more fully embraces the RNG roguelike sort of systems and mechanics in conjunction with having a like clear story start to finish between the entire game that's interesting and intriguing and leads the players to a conclusion. Act 6 sort of like tries to give this janky conclusion at the end. And I just sort of feel like too little too late. Like Act 5 and Act 6 have a story that connects. Though again, there's not a lot of substance to it. But the first campaigns, the first 4 campaigns, the stories are pretty weak as far as how they connect. There's not a whole lot of intrigue, there's not a whole lot of depth. They like don't reveal to you like until like missions, like until like the 3rd campaign that like, oh, there might be a cure or something like that. Spoilers, it doesn't really matter. There's like there's no real plot. But wouldn't it be cool if there was a plot? And I feel like Act 5 and Act 6, which should probably be just one campaign, sort of gave this hint of an idea of like, oh, it would be kind of nice if this game actually had like an intriguing storyline to it. And sort of like leaves Back 4 Blood in the state of like, oh, it's kind of got this cool roguelike element that it's doing, but it doesn't quite go all the way with it. And oh, it's kind of got like right at the end sort of like an intriguing, interesting story, but doesn't have a lot of substance, and then the game just sort of ends. It sort of leaves Back 4 Blood, I think, overall a decent enough experience, but like too little too late in a lot of circumstances, and like doesn't really embrace what I think it's got going for it hard enough. And then of course now they got the trials, which I think is like honestly ends up being like more of the same. They do add like the leaderboard competitive element to it, which I actually think is sort of like a more interesting take on maybe having a versus mode, having a leaderboard about players, you know, playing through the game really fast and strong and things like that. But I think the leaderboard is maybe bugged. I don't know. The leaderboards always get bugged. It seems like the easiest thing in the world for people to bug out. But again, too little, too late. And also, too, like the trials is sort of like more of the same. Other than that, you can up the difficulty in some interesting ways and get like the ultimate difficult Back for Blood experience, and like that's the ultimate difficulty challenge, and you can get points on the leaderboard and things like that. At the end of it all, though, like the trials is shorter. It's only 4 missions. Do you actually remove a lot of the roguelike elements to a degree? Or like the trials adds the roguelike element of like extra corruption cards that persist through the campaign, but then like the campaign's shorter, so you remove a lot of opportunity for the players to experience the roguelike elements as far as them powering up. And I think Trials is neat. It's kind of cool. It's sort of like it's definitively like the end game content of Back for Blood. I don't think it's incredible. I would love to see it like fleshed out more and more developed potentially. But honestly, like just playing through a nice long campaign is just as good. And I think too, like Act 5 and Act 6 being so short, only 5 missions each, really just sort of goes to show like those campaigns specifically hurt the game in the sense that like they don't embrace that roguelike element because there's not enough time for the players to slowly bloat up the strength, the power, the extra cards. Like that to me is like one of the coolest elements of Back for Blood is that sometimes from the start of the campaign to the end of it, you end up super strong, crazy powerful, best attachments. You got like 300 points of health because you found like 20 extra bonus health cards and tons of stamina, and you're super rich. Like I feel like that's like the element that like where Back for Blood pushed the genre, but didn't fully embrace it. I sort of like broken record here. Let's see what else I got on my list here. So overall, I think yeah, like Back for Blood, a little too late with some of the updates. Not like just sort of like this sort of long road of like problems persisting for too long, the player experience sort of being hecked up and things like that. I would love to see this genre embrace that roguelike element, for the genre to have a more cohesive story that's interesting and intriguing. And also too, you know, the environments, like it's a post-apocalyptic world. We can be going anywhere, doing anything. Instead you have us running through the same streets, right? So like some of the more cooler missions for Back for Blood, in my opinion, was like the mission where you run through the prison, right? I've never been to a prison, but we all sort of know what it looks like. And there's sort of like a nice sort of like interesting take of like viewing places that people are familiar with, but in the post-apocalyptic setting, like a shopping center or a hospital. No Mercy, love No Mercy. You know, like something inherently cool, intrinsically valuable about just like experiencing places that players are familiar with, but in this sort of like in a different context. And so I just feel like Back for Blood didn't really deliver on that in a lot of ways. A lot of like outside missions or sort of like generic, you know, like tunnel mission. I don't know. I just feel like there could have been more. There could have been more, and I think like at the end of the day, like Back for Blood could have had more. But overall, if let's wrap it up here in a little summary here. I would say overall, summary wise, at this point in time, Back for Blood is a decent enough experience, especially if you got 3 friends to play it with. It sort of scratches the surface, I think, of like what could be really cool in a cooperative PvE shooter game, like more roguelike elements, more depth, more storytelling, better environments, you know, going through a laboratory, I don't know, or something like that. I would have loved to see. One really frustrating thing about Back for Blood is that the initial way that you unlocked cards was the supply chains or whatever, and they were labeled after like Border Town, and Susie's Hospital, and Mitch's Bowling Alley, and it was like other post-apocalyptic societies that were building up in the local area, and it was like world building, and I was like, oh, so cool, like. I didn't know what the rest of the campaign was going to be like, and so I was like, oh man, like it would be kind of cool to play a mission on Bridgetown and go from one side of the bridge to the other when Bridgetown is suffering an attack. And there was like this whole world that they teased us with that we never saw, that you never got to experience. I would have loved to have seen what other post-apocalyptic societies were looking like, playing through their environments, playing through their cities. I think just like a missed opportunity to a degree. And I think in a sense, like, that's maybe too big of a scope that Turtle Rock had. Or like too big of a scope for Turtle Rock to sort of approach and get through. But I think it just sort of like, I think Back 4 Blood ultimately shows the amount of potential this genre of game could have and could be. I think there is a Left 4 Dead killer out there, not yet made. Left 4 Dead, though, in contrast to this game, because we have to compare them, really shows how good and how much players appreciate just a nice, clean, smooth experience. You know, there's always bugs and glitches in Left 4 Dead, but nothing so gameplay impacting that Back 4 Blood had. So Left 4 Dead just sort of shows that, like, a nice, clean, crisp, simple player experience is quite enjoyable, and if it's done well, and it's fun to play through with, you know, decent enough characters and through fun environments, then it's a blast. Absolute blast. I think Left 4 Dead 2 is also surviving through the fact that there's a lot of modding potential in that game, but that's neither here nor there, right? So, Back 4 Blood. Is it worth the price? Now, funny enough, as I'm making this, there's like a bloody Valentine promotion going on right now. So Back 4 Blood is 75% off right now. Of course, we're going to sort of ignore those numbers. Back 4 Blood is still a full price game at $60. And that does not include the 3 DLCs, which is $15 each. So for $90, you can buy the deluxe version and basically get one of those DLCs for free, essentially. So let's just say, logically, if you're going to play Back 4 Blood and get the full experience, you'll probably just want to buy the deluxe version, which is $90. Is Back 4 Blood in its current state worth $90? I would say no, right? Keep in mind that the community is dying, it's bleeding off. It's, I think, less than 5,000 concurrent players right now. I would say overall, Back 4 Blood's a really good, fun experience to be played with your friends, especially. Maybe not so much in quick play. So really, I would say, like, Back 4 Blood, in my opinion, should be closer to the $20 mark. The game, plus all 3 campaigns, $20 to $30 maybe, that's probably more worth it. I think you can very easily and comfortably get about, like, 20 to 50 hours of gameplay out of it if you're willing to take the time to unlock all the cards and play through the campaign on harder difficulties and unlock, like, the SWAT skins and things like that. You can very easily get your money's worth out of Back 4 Blood. If you're only going to play through the campaign once on the easier difficulties, it's just not worth it unless you're, again, playing with friends. Like, I think a lot of it summarizes into just, if you're going to play with friends, then yeah, it can be worth it. If you're looking for the single player experience, there's no story. Right? There's no story. The environments are decent enough, but they're nothing too crazy. Like, overall, Back 4 Blood, like, you're not gonna go like, oh, this crazy Back 4 Blood experience, right? But I think at the end of the day, cheaper is gonna be better for Back 4 Blood, and also too, it's like on the Xbox Games Pass, it's on the PlayStation Plus stuff right now. So, like, I would say really, Back 4 Blood is probably not worth the purchase. Probably better to find it really cheap, or to find it on one of those, like, Game Pass things that, you know, a lot of you guys already have. A lot of you guys are always already, participating in and things like that. But I think Back 4 Blood, good foundation. I think it shows what the genre could do. It didn't quite get there itself, but I will say I have 1,000 hours in it. I had a lot of fun playing it, but definitely ready to move on. I think no content on the horizon. There's other things to complain about too, and other things that Back 4 Blood sort of did well also. Like the progression system is kind of janky and not that satisfying, that fulfilling. They had to like do janky solutions to it with like introducing different currencies in the game for you to unlock the other cards because it was just so easy to earn supply points. And anyways, I've rambled on enough. Please let me know in the comments what you guys think. Did I miss anything? Any good points? Any really bad points? Let me know. But I think ultimately, pretty safe to say Back 4 Blood just didn't quite get there. It scratches the surface of what could have been really, really awesome. Just didn't quite accomplish that. And now that its live service is not being continued, it's just going to slowly bleed players off and slowly over time. And that'll just make buying the game less and less valuable. And eventually, it's like, if you like the style of Left 4 Dead, Back 4 Blood may be worth a checkout, but do it for cheap. Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate it. And I'll see you guys at Company of Heroes 3.